Hi, I'm Brian Taylor from the Herald. I'm here in Bute House and delighted to be joined by the First Minister, John Swinney, First Minister in the last Parliament and about to be First Minister in the new Parliament. Mr Swinney, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Congratulations upon your victory.
Thank you very much.
A victory in your own name, a victory in your own terms. It's taken a wee while for that to happen. You've had a few failures, let's be blunt, in the past.
Well, that's right. It's taken a while to get to this particular point, and although I served as First Minister for 2 years, albeit under a mandate that was achieved by Nicola Sturgeon in 2021, there is something incredibly special about achieving your own mandate. And indeed, I noticed in the news media at the weekend, Jack McConnell, one of my Labour predecessors, went through exactly the same experience. He inherited a mandate in 2001, but talked about how different it felt to win your own mandate as he did in 2003, and as I have now done in 2026.
We were talking in this interview about the long view rather than perhaps the short-term politics. So taking the long view, it feels very different to you. Does it feel like what? Personal release, personal mandate?
It feels entirely a personal mandate that I was front and centre of the election campaign. I was setting out our stall. I was providing people with...
You talked about your own experience?
Totally. And I made an issue of the fact that I thought at this moment what the country required was what I communicated as my view of the trusted, reliable leadership that I could offer. And at that very personal level, it's a moment of enormous satisfaction that the public have supported me as substantially as they have.
As substantially as they have, a clear victory, but not an unalloyed victory. You lost seats, you lost voting share. It could be said in some ways that you're here by accident because the rival parties collapsed to some extent.
Well, I think it would take some doing for any of the other parties to have come anywhere close to where the SNP achieved. So, you know, we have 58 members. Our nearest rival, or rivals,
plural,
are joint second on 17. So, you know, every other political party would have to go an absolutely colossal distance to come anywhere close to the SNP. So, yes, you're absolutely right. We lost seats, and I reflect on the election campaign and all the issues that were raised, all my conversations around the country, to bring that back into Bute House with me. So I'm not forgetting a word of those conversations as I come back into Bute House to lead the country and to lead the government, reflecting on what has been said to me during that election.
But to echo that previous point you made, you feel energised by a personal victory. You feel perhaps liberated by a personal victory to go down the road of the changes that you would prefer rather than perhaps the collective view would prefer.
That's exactly how I feel. That this is a moment where I have a mandate from the people of Scotland to lead our government on the issues and the perspectives that I set out. And some of those perspectives are very much my view about how you do politics and how you advance your arguments. And so therefore, I do think how I feel today is very different to how I felt when I came in to Bute House 2 years ago. I felt I was coming in on a mandate that had been won by Nicola Sturgeon, and you know, I obviously carry enormous respect and regard and affection for Nicola. But I'm now here in my own right, and that's different.
When you took over at that point in 2024, let's talk about that since you've raised it. The SNP was struggling. You were plainly and clearly in the polls behind Labour. It didn't look like you would be returned as the government. What changed during that period?
I think there's one thing I'd say before I come on to that, Brian. I think it's actually worse than that. I thought the SNP was in danger of collapse at that stage in 2024.
Of collapse?
Oh yes, I thought the SNP was in such a difficult position in 2024 that I had absolutely no alternative to come back in and try to restore the fortunes of the party.
Rescue your party?
Yes, totally. And that's what I've done. I've literally rescued the SNP from a position of enormous peril. I thought in danger of collapse in 2024 because of
collapse, obliteration, going out of business.
Literally of the SNP being in a position whereby we had lost our focus on the public, and we were divided. And I had to heal the SNP, and that's what I've done. And I've restored its relationship with the public, and we now find ourselves in a leading position that nobody in 2024 would have thought was possible. And that's come about by the focus I've had on rebuilding relationships within the party, about making sure we've got good democratic governance within the party, and most importantly, we face outwards and not look inwards.
What brought about that near collapse in 2024? Was it events, Macmillan-style events, or did your predecessors muck it up? Did they mess it up?
Events is what sums it all up. But you know, that's all in the past.
Did your predecessors make a mess of it?
No, I think what happened. Events happened.
Okay.
Events happened. Lots of things happened, and we now get to a position where we can look forward. And that's what I'm very optimistic about.
You're undeniably the leader of the SNP. You're undeniably going to be reinstalled as First Minister. But of course you were leader before. From 2000 to 2004, it was notably unsuccessful. Let's be honest, let's be frank about it. What has changed since then? Has Scotland changed? Have you changed?
I think a bit of both. I think the time that I was leader of the SNP before was not a time that was sort of conducive to our politics. It was in the early days of devolution. There was a lot of, as you will remember from that period, a sense of enormous excitement about devolution, and then a feeling of real kind of disappointment once devolution started. So it was what I would say rather infertile territory. But I also have to accept that I wasn't the person then that I am today. So the person I am today has obviously been shaped by many years in government, the ability to take decisions, to give leadership, to deliver for people. You know, I remember when we came into government in 2007, people saying, well, you know, they'll never ever manage to get a budget through a Scottish Parliament where they were very much a minority government. And we got a budget through in the first time of asking at my hand. And lots of these events changed me, but I think the fact that when I came back into the leadership, very unexpected, I didn't need to be First Minister. I'd stood down voluntarily at the end of a long career. I was very happy with what I
thought you were coasting gently to perhaps departing Parliament.
Well, I was kind of, you know, I was in a position where I'd served as a senior minister for 16 years, and I felt, well, I've done my bit. It's time to move on and lead a slightly quieter life. And, you know, we might come on to what I might have, you know, reasons why I'd be wanting to live a quieter life. And then the party faced a moment where it needed me to come back in. And that's exactly what I've done. And I've come back in with the benefit of all those years of frontline political experience, able to take what I think is the right decisions that have engineered the SNP's return to success.
I'll move on to policies in a moment, but I want to talk a little more about yourself. Again, this long view perspective. Who or what influences you? Who or what drives you? Do you have an inner circle that upon whom you rely?
Yes, I have a core team of people who advise me, who are a combination of politicians and members of my team, who are people, some of whom I've worked with for a very long time, some of whom I recruited all those years ago, who are still with me at my side.
Who remember the dark days.
Well, they do remember the dark days. They remember what it was like. I also rely upon a number of political colleagues who are close to me and whose counsel I seek. And the crucial thing about me is that I create a very open conversation about what we should do, how we should act, how we should behave. So people are able to say difficult things in front of me. Nobody gets shut down. I hear it all. I let it all be aired. Hear what people have got to say.
Are they sometimes rather blunt about your own performance?
Well, no, I wouldn't say they're blunt about my own performance, but they're giving their own constructive contribution to the choices we've got to make. But it's an open conversation, and that's crucial in politics, I think, that you've got to hear folk. And then ultimately, and this is what, of course, it's the bit about becoming First Minister and party leader that I suppose it takes a little bit of getting used to, is that you suddenly realise, oh my goodness, I have got the final say on everything. So that's something you have to get adjusted to and accustomed to, and it doesn't come naturally. But I feel I'm much better equipped to be in that position now than I was in my earlier stint as SNP leader.
You're describing a long career, a varied career. Any regrets within that career? Any missed opportunities you would identify?
I wouldn't say missed opportunities. You know, I have stepped up. I think I would have felt I would have felt if I had not come forward to try to repair the situation the SNP faced in 2024, I think I would have felt a real sense of regret if I'd walked on the other side. And that would have been out of character for me with all that I've contributed to the SNP over many years. So, but there's no opportunities that I feel I've missed. I feel I've always been prepared to step forward.
You've had
when it was required to do so.
You've had setbacks. Setbacks are customary in politics, but you've had some big setbacks. One thinks of 2020 and the row over the school's exams, where you were accused by altering the exam results of downgrading the prospects for working class kids. That was a blunder, surely.
That was certainly an error for which I recognise that was an error. But and in that moment, I came very close to leaving government at that time. I discussed with Nicola Sturgeon the prospect of me resigning from the government, and she asked me not to do so. I thought it would have helped if I'd done so, but she just simply said, look, we're going to have to fix this. So why don't you go and fix it, and let's explain what's happened to the public, because we were in COVID times. We had no guidebook about what to do. We were trying our best. And some things we got right and some things we got wrong. The exam situation was one of the things that we got wrong. And I suppose the lesson I learnt from that is that when you get things wrong, just be straight and open with people about it.
Another issue that is still persisting, not directly perhaps in your remit, although you've been challenged about it, that's the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, the suggestion that the Scottish Government pushed for that hospital to be open too soon before really they were ready, and that patients suffered as a consequence. I
don't think from what I've seen in the evidence to the inquiry there's anything to substantiate that, other than the fact that, obviously when we want to build hospitals, we want to get them open so that they're available for people. But the public inquiry will consider all.
And you believe you will be exonerated by that public inquiry?
Well, the public inquiry will say what the public inquiry says. I'm not going to predict what Lord Brodie says. But I think from what the inquiry has said on reflecting on these issues about timescale, it doesn't strike me that there was any pressure that was applied to do so.
I'm going to come to contemporary events very shortly, but let me ask you one more broad, instinctive, characteristic question, if you like. Would you say you are an instinctive nationalist? A gut nationalist?
Yes.
Or is it an intellectual choice?
Especially that way, I'm an instinctive nationalist. As a teenager, I watched the debate in the 1970s about the prospect of Scotland having a Scottish Assembly, which was the subject of a referendum in 1979. And I watched that debate as a teenager, and I came to the view that it was right that Scotland should decide her own future. So in that respect, I am a conviction politician, believing that the people of Scotland have the right and the capacity to determine their own future, and their future should be in their hands. So that has shaped my view of my politics consistently throughout my adult life.
Let's come to that shortly, but let's come to some of the controversies that arise as a result of the election. You're holding talks with all the other parties except Reform. You've come under some criticism for excluding them.
I just think I've got to be straight with the public that I think Reform represent a set of values that are not mine, and they seek to divide and to pit people against people within our society because of who they are. And I just don't want to go along with that, and I won't go along with it. And I said during the election I wouldn't cooperate or collaborate with Reform, and I think it's really important after the election that I live up to those commitments.
But isn't it a political slip-up? Doesn't it give them the possibility of arguing that they are seen as the anti-establishment rebels, almost the self-image that they crave, and you've handed it to them?
Well, I said all this during the election, and they got 17 seats, and I got 58. And I think by most of the assessments, the 17-seat outcome that they got was the disappointing end of the spectrum of what Reform thought they were going to get. So that gives me some confidence that the public in Scotland, when they're exposed to the arguments about Reform, find them less attractive than they initially might find them. And And I just, what I've decided I'm going to do as First Minister, I decided this when I came in the door 2 years ago, and I feel reinforced about this with my own mandate. I'm just going to say it to the public as it is, and just be completely open with the public about what I think and what I feel about these issues. And that's what I feel. So the public should hear that from me.
Let's be open about something then. You got 58 seats, as you rightly say, but it isn't the 65. You needed to form a majority. It isn't the 65. You needed to govern in your own right. Are you now talking about minority government or a coalition, a pact with another party?
I'm going to talk to other political parties to see just what areas of cooperation exist between us. I think when you do the analysis of party manifestos, which of course I've done, there's a lot of common ground. What I need to see is there a willingness to allow that common ground to prevail in Parliament? Are we prepared to find ways of working together on issues that will improve people's lives, whether that's particularly, especially just now, about the challenges that the public face about the cost of living? Can we find ways of working quickly and effectively to try to provide effective support?
But it's working on an issue-by-issue basis. It's not a formal coalition.
I'm going to explore all these issues with parties, because again, another of my strengths, and I've deployed this over my political life, I think I've got an ability to bring people to points of agreement. I demonstrated it when I was Finance Minister, bringing people together around about agreements on budget propositions. And as I said when I became First Minister, I wanted to recreate that sense of collaborative working within Parliament where it's possible. I've set out where I think it's not possible. That's with reform. So that's what I'm exploring.
Could there be? We're in Butte House. Your party had a Butte House pact with the Greens. Could there be another Butte House pact, or is it more likely that it's issue by issue?
I think that's unlikely. I think it's much more likely that we will work on a case-by-case basis with political parties and try to find common ground.
You have done budget deals in the last couple of years with the Liberal Democrats. Could they be attractive as partners?
In the course of, in what I know about my diary so far this week, I'm seeing the Greens and the Labour Party. I'm hoping to see the Liberals.
The Tories say no, yeah.
Tories say no, and Reform, I've obviously not extended the invitation to them. So I'm interested in exploring what's possible in finding agreement on issues that can result in improvements in the lives of people in Scotland.
Is it possible that the Greens and Reform cancel each other out and you have, in effect, a majority of the rest of the seats?
I think it depends on how parties decide to align themselves within Parliament, but I think for some of the reasons that we've rehearsed already, I think it is difficult for others to work with Reform. It's not just me that's got issues about Reform, I know.
So you could come through the middle. So your 58 seats could be more than it's worth.
Well, I listen to what some of my political rivals say about their politics, and it's crystal clear to me that the Liberal Democrats have no common ground with Reform, and the Greens have no common ground with Reform, and the Labour Party have no common ground with Reform. So there's obviously the possibility for us to work together to advance an agenda that will truly improve the lives of people in Scotland, and that's what I'm in politics to do.
Let's take the long view again, First Minister. Let's take the long view again. What is your broad approach? You talked about the cost of living crisis, and it is certainly worrying people. I've never seen a populace so anxious and upset and concerned. What is your broad economic answer to that? Is it what business leaders are demanding, which is a drive for growth?
Yes, it is, and that's been at the foundation and the heart of my politics. And the SNP manifesto for this election was very heavily anchored on the concept of achieving higher levels of economic growth in Scotland. So that is going to be one of the essential priorities of my government over the course of the next 5 years, to improve economic conditions. That involves us looking very hard at how we attract investment, how we create employment opportunities, how we remove obstacles to the ability to deliver growth. So that means us looking at the planning system to make sure that, for example, in a country that needs to build more houses, we can make that more straightforward for development interests to be able to build houses, or in relation to some of the regulatory issues, how we can make it simpler and more straightforward for us to deliver investments in our economy without sacrificing or compromising any of the the important characteristics of our country, but fundamentally about making investments happen.
Does it also mean that you strive to be moderate on income tax, again, as business is suggesting you should?
Well, again in our manifesto, I essentially said we're not going to be increasing bands or rates. So we've essentially, in my view, reached the ceiling of that. And the question is, we set out that our aspiration is to simplify the tax system and to have low and middle income earners at the heart of that. So that's very much how we will take our decisions year by year as we go through the budget process.
Still on the economy, the Scottish Fiscal Commission is saying there could be a £5 billion, I think it's 4.75 is the actual figure, by the end of this Parliament. That's spending outpacing revenue. How on earth do you fill that gap?
You fill it through reform, and you ensure that the reforms that you undertake are sufficient to make sure that the track record of an SNP government over the last 19 years is able to be sustained of delivering a balanced budget on a year-by-year basis.
So let's be specific on that. Substantial reform in the NHS?
Yes, absolutely. And we've got to shift the emphasis in the NHS away from unscheduled engagement in the NHS, which is very expensive, and to much earlier intervention in the NHS. So the steps that we're taking to ensure that, we set this out last summer in the population health framework about ensuring much earlier intervention on health conditions. The health MOTs proposition that we put in our manifesto is designed to turn that into reality, so that people essentially are getting earlier intervention when it's planned and it's scheduled, rather than turning up in emergency, which is the very expensive and challenging part of our system. And
reform of education. We're in here in Bute House. A former Secretary of State for Scotland who occupied this building, Michael Forsyth, was asked whether education in Scotland needed reform, and he said what it needs is a bloody revolution. Now,
well, I'm not surprised that was Michael Forsyth's view of the world, but certainly Scottish education needs reform. I spent 5 years.
Radical change, big change.
Well, what I always believed was central in our education system was the autonomy and agency of the teaching profession, particularly of teaching leaders in our schools. So the reform agenda I want to take forward is about making sure that our head teachers and our teaching staff have agency, they've got control, they've got much more discretion about making sure they can adapt the educational offering to meet the needs of the children that they are working with and supporting. And that is at the heart of the agenda I want to take forward, to make sure the teaching profession have got the opportunity to deploy their outstanding professional expertise to enable children to thrive.
Reform of the civil service more generally. I mean, I'm told that Herald readers get upset when they learn of empty buildings and the lights all burning.
We certainly, I've said that as part of our public service reform agenda, there is going to have to be a reduction in public sector employment. We will protect frontline staff, but there is going to have to be a reduction in the number of public bodies. There will have to be a reduction in the in public sector employment. So all of these things are part of addressing the question that you asked me a few moments ago, which is about guaranteeing the sustainability of the public finances. So we can't carry on with the models as they are just now. And the reform strategy that we set out last summer gave a reflection about how we would go about making sure that the public services remain sustainable.
Will you set up a central team to drive reform?
Well, obviously it will be led from the cabinet table. It will have my authority behind it, and it will involve a lot of what I've been doing since I came back into government.
But this is a big deal, First Minister. This is a very big deal.
It's a very big deal, and what I've been doing since I came back into government is engaging with the civil service leadership to make clear exactly what to expect from my incoming government, because these are some of the significant issues we're going to have to address.
Coming close to concluding, but let's talk about more broad issues. You talk about working with the First Minister of Wales, likely to be Plaid Cymru. You talk about working with the First Minister of Northern Ireland, Sinn Fein. A nationalist trio, perhaps?
Yes, very much so, and I'm very excited about the possibility. I had a couple of great conversations over the weekend, one with Rúna Búrworth, the leader of Plaid Cymru, who I do hope becomes the First Minister of Wales, and with Mary Lou MacDonald, the President of Sinn Fein, and Michelle O'Neill, the Vice President of Sinn Fein. And I think this is Well, this has been described as a seismic moment whereby the leaders of the three devolved governments in the United Kingdom are all nationalists who want a change to the constitutional arrangements.
They want the end of the United Kingdom with varying degrees of fervour.
Well, that's right, exactly. And that is a seismic moment. That's of enormous significance. So I think by our cooperation, we can advance our agendas. I obviously want Scotland to be independent. I don't speak for the other governments, but we do have, all of us, I think it would be fair to say, all of us are dissatisfied with the current constitutional arrangements, and I'm very keen to work with others to advance that.
Can you really work with Sinn Fein, given their history?
Yes, of course. Brian, you and I have seen the changes in Northern Ireland politics and in the security situation in Northern Ireland. It's been one of the things actually that I was a student at Edinburgh University in the 80s. I did a dissertation about the politics of Northern Ireland, and I looked at it very closely. If you'd said to me in 1986, when I was doing that Northern Ireland would be able to deliver the Good Friday Agreement, signed off by Ian Paisley as the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party and Gerry Adams as the president of Sinn Fein, supported by the British and Irish governments, I would have been pretty sceptical about that. But it happened. So the world's moved on, and I think I know that my dialogue with Sinn Fein caused a bit of media consternation in Scotland. I really do think people have got to move on.
We're sitting in front of the fireplace here in Bute House, used for photo calls. I think one photo call here was with yourself and a certain Sir Keir Starmer, who is, to say the least, in difficulty and trouble and turmoil. Have you any, as a leader yourself, have you any empathy for the plight he faces, or has he brought it upon himself?
I don't have much empathy for it. Obviously, at a human, personal level, it's tough. I've gone through really tough times in leadership, and it's not pleasant. So at a human level, yes. But as I look at it, I think it's. I'm not surprised at what's happened. When Keir Starmer came in as Prime Minister, he talked to me, sat exactly where you're sitting, talked to me about pursuing a respect agenda with the Scottish Government, turning a chapter on all the bad relationships with the previous Tory government, and things were going to be so much better. There were some improvements, some things that got better. Intergovernmental relations are terrible just now. Terrible, and they have been terrible since Ian Murray stopped being the Secretary of State for Scotland. They were quite constructive when Ian Murray was there. Just hopeless.
That's maybe why you got the heave.
Maybe it is why he got the heave, but actually, it's done them no good. Because he got the heave, I think, to strengthen the Labour campaign against me, and it's failed spectacularly. But I think my biggest observation about Keir Starmer and why I don't have any empathy at a political level is that he came into office not knowing what he wanted to achieve, and he couldn't convey that to the public. And I think one of the things that heartens, one of the big reflections I took from the Hamilton by-election that we did not win in June 2025, as I reflected on that, I realised I hadn't given people a reason to vote SNP in Hamilton. And I then went away and said, I've got to give people compelling reasons to vote for the SNP in the elections in 2026, and I think I offered those. I offered people continued improvement in the NHS, I offered them support in the cost of living challenges, and I offered them the fresh start of independence, and that's, I think, what has got us where we are today.
I'll talk about that very topic in just a few seconds, but let's talk about another leader that you've worked with, President Donald Trump. You did or you did not secure the deal on whiskey.
Seemed to cause a lot of unease.
Let's not go down that line. He gave you at least credit for a partial involvement as well. But let's talk about him. Do you respect him? Do you even admire him as a leader?
I take the very simple view that people in Scotland would expect me to use every opportunity to advance Scotland's interests, and I've had opportunities to advance those interests with President Trump, and I've taken them.
Do you admire him personally?
I don't kind of come to those conclusions about people. I just have got a job to do, and I get on with doing it.
Is he affable, warm, friendly?
I spent an hour and a half at dinner with President Trump when he came to open his golf course in Aberdeenshire, and we had a perfectly interesting and pleasant conversation, and he asked me lots and
Seems
lots.
like you.
Well, he asked me lots and lots about Scotland, and he was intrigued about Scotland, and I think he probably takes the view that he's got deep affection for Scotland because of his mum, and I think he probably takes the view, well, I like Scotland, so I'll get on well with the First Minister.
Let's turn to independence. You set out in this election campaign seeking a majority, 65 plus, and you said that that would be the mandate for a further referendum. You didn't get that. You got 58. You're short. Does that mean that the demand for a referendum is off the table, is dead and buried?
I put forward that approach of the majority strategy to try to break the logjam that we've got, where we've got an intransigent UK government that won't respect a parliamentary majority for independence. Now, I never got the mechanism of breaking the logjam, but I've still got there's a parliamentary majority there for independence.
Indeed, hang on a second. You said it was about an SNP majority. Now you're saying it's SNP plus Greens.
My mechanism was to break the logjam. And what I've now got to do is to find another way of breaking the logjam, because winning independence is part of the whole reasoning of my politics and what drives me. Because I think Scotland, and as I look at the situation we face, the hardship that members of the public are facing just now, a lot of that has been caused because of Brexit, which is an issue inextricably linked to the decisions of the United Kingdom against the will of the people of Scotland. Independence sorts that out. It addresses that. It enables Scotland to be a part of the European Union, and that's why I think it's so important that we take forward that argument and find a means of giving vent to the democratic right of the people of Scotland to decide.
But it's not easy to see what that means might be, because the UK government can just say no, 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 and the Supreme Court confirmed that they have the power.
I think it's getting easier, because I think there's now beginning to be other voices who are saying this lack of democratic opportunity cannot be sustained. Now, one of the Labour members of the Scottish Parliament elected, Paul Swinney, has talked about the need for there to be a mechanism. Now that's interesting thinking, and I'm interested in what comes out of that. I think some of that could usefully be explored in perhaps some form of constitutional convention.
But this is down the line. You accept that in the immediate future, you don't have the statutory levers. You can apply political pressure, but you don't have statutory or legal powers.
Well, obviously, in terms of legal powers, it's clear where the responsibility lies. But in terms of political impetus, I think we have got political impetus around this issue, because there's a parliamentary majority in the Scottish Parliament in favour of independence and in favour of a referendum on independence. And I think what the debate is now beginning to say is, well, we need to have a means of resolving this issue, and I intend to find that means. That's what I will be focused on, making sure that Scotland has got a choice, and perhaps the route of a constitutional convention of bringing some wider understanding to make sure Scotland has that opportunity is something that's worth exploring.
But it's worth exploring perhaps in the longer term.
No.
But do you accept it in the short term? Westminster can simply say no?
Well, in the short term, I don't accept that. No, I don't. No. Because I think Westminster is flying in the face. So, I said I would bring to the Scottish Parliament a proposition around Scotland being, demand for a Section 30 order to allow us to establish a referendum. Yeah. I will do that. Because
you'll table that demand for a Section 30?
Of course I'll do that. Because there's a parliamentary majority that expects that in the Scottish Parliament, and I'm part of that parliamentary majority. And what I've got to make sure is that I continue to make the argument, and that I continue to press their case for Scotland to be able to decide her own future. And that's exactly what I will do in the short, medium and long term.
Would you press that case even if the figures suggested that Scotland might be economically damaged in the short term?
I think Scotland is inherently a wealthy and successful country. Okay. And what I want to do is to make sure the people of our country have got the opportunity to experience that wealth, which they don't have just now. So, in the course of the election campaign, I was up, Tuesday before poll, I was up in Wick, and it was a beautiful day, and I could see out on the horizon the offshore wind turbines that have been constructed, generating huge economic wealth. The people of Scotland are not benefiting from that, and I need to sort that with independence.
Let's talk finally about an issue you mentioned previously, again a broad term issue. You had to consider your family circumstances when you put yourself forward as First Minister. Presumably that is still a very, very large consideration weighing upon your mind.
It is, and I can't say that the last few weeks have been particularly easy for us as a family, because we've had an election campaign underway in which obviously I've been under enormous pressure during that period. Our son Matthew has been, well, still is, sitting his National 5 exams.
Best of luck.
And Elizabeth has not been particularly well.
No, indeed.
And we were, I was hoping that she would be strong enough to come with me to the count on Friday, and I wasn't sure that would be possible. She was able to. It's taken a lot out of her, and she's pretty weary as a consequence. But she got there, and I was so glad that she was there with me, because it was such an incredible moment. And also, Matthew was sitting on Friday at the count, during the count, National 5 Maths in the morning, and then National 5 Music Technology, which finished at 2 o'clock. And I don't know if it was the innate kindness of the counters of Perth and Kinross Council, but the result, which was expected at 1:30, didn't come till about 2:20, and he arrived at the count at 2:10. So it was just lovely that he was able to be there to see the declaration when we weren't sure. But it has been a tough few weeks, but we're drawing breath after it, and there's a couple more exams to be done, and Elizabeth's got a wee bit of time to gain some strength again.
Very last question, First Minister. You're sustained, as you say there, by your family. Are you also sustained, this is a question not normally raised in politics, are you also sustained by your faith?
Yes. My faith is very, very important. It's not something I talk an awful lot about, but it is absolutely fundamental to who I am and the person I have become. I'm struck by, I reflected this in an interview before, that there are two elements of my faith that are really fundamental. One is do unto others as you would have done unto yourself, which governs so much of how I behave towards other people, because I don't want to treat people any way other than the way I would want to be treated. And then also, nothing can separate you from the love of God, which is that in this world of politics, things can get really tough, and it can be really anxious and really worrying, and ultimately that sentiment, those words, essentially give me an ultimate assurance that however tough it gets, I'll always have the love of God, and that's important to me. And on Sunday, we were in Edinburgh over the weekend. I had lots to do after the election, and we went to Mass at St Peter's in Morningside, where Elizabeth and I were married in 2003. And at the very start of the Mass, the priest opened the Mass and extended a welcome to the First Minister, and said, we go there every so often when we're in Edinburgh, and said that, and this is utterly precious to me, that assured me that I would always be in the prayers of the people of St Peter's. And it was one of these moments, for me, an absolute landmark moment of the election, where after it's all said and done, and the peacefulness of St Peter's and Morningside, I got that assurance of that there are people out there who are quietly, patiently praying for my well-being and for the success of what I do on behalf of Scotland, and that's incredibly precious to me.
First Minister, thank you very much indeed for joining me for this Herald interview. Thank you again.
Thank you, Brian.